Hi, I'm Ron D. Haas. Welcome again to our ongoing series of Facebook Live as well as YouTube Live. I always appreciate it when you click that like button on the Facebook Live, and also on YouTube. Please join our YouTube channel because we have a number of videos on the YouTube channel as well. So I welcome you to visit both our Facebook site and our YouTube channel. And I always like it when we have a live visitor. Today we are very blessed to have with us a special guest all the way from California visiting us here. And by the way, we're in Central Michigan. If you're ever visiting Central Michigan, I certainly welcome you to come and visit us here at Covenant Eyes, just northeast of Lansing. So please stop by and say hi. But in the meantime, we have with us Coach Ray from Betrayal Trauma Recovery, btr.org. And Coach Ray, your name, of course, implies that you're a coach.
I am a coach.
And one of the things that you focus on is the recovery, helping women heal from the betrayal of sexual abandonment. So let's get right into it and talk about that sexual abandonment. Tell me what you mean by sexual abandonment.
Yeah, and I'm really huge on defining and applying personal labels and filters to things. So when I refer to sexual or relational, I kind of lump those two together, sexual or relational abandonment within an intimate relationship. When I first worked in this field, I had to broaden my perspective because when I heard the word abandonment, I pictured, parents leaving a baby on the steps of a church, or, a dad leaving his kids and leaving them destitute. Things like that's kind of that physical departure or separation from a relational situation. But what I found in this work, as I began spending a lot of my time, all of my time, working with women healing from sexual betrayal and sexual betrayal trauma, often in situations with spouses who were addicted to porn or other forms of compulsive sexual behavior. So they were expressing to me this sense of abandonment, feeling like they were being pulled away from, even by someone who was still sitting right next to them on the couch. So a partner or a spouse who was still in that committed relationship, but perhaps was spending far more of their own time, energy, emotional investment, sexual energy, those sorts of things outside the relationship. So when I started working with women and trying to define this sense of sexual abandonment that they felt, the way we describe it is someone takes from the relationship a need that they could either give or receive within the relationship and brings it someplace else at the expense of the person left behind in that relationship.
Would you repeat that? That's really good.
I can do that,
repeat
yes.
That, please.
Sexual abandonment, when someone takes from the relationship something they could give or receive within the relationship, takes it away at the expense of the person remaining behind within the relationship.
And gives it to somebody else instead.
You got it. Gives it to somebody else, uses it for themselves. In either way, it's taken away from the person who oftentimes unknowingly doesn't understand why this feeling of abandonment is existing within their relationship.
I know there are listeners who relate to what you just said. Of course, here at Covenant Eyes, we deal directly with the issue of pornography. Does pornography, I'm sure it does, this is a rhetorical question, what role does pornography play in this sexual abandonment?
I'm really glad you brought that up because, again, it's easy for us to understand, say, someone leaves the relationship to go and have an affair. We can understand why that person would feel abandoned, or if a person divorces or leaves their partner, we can understand that abandonment. It's that sense of he may be physically present or she may be physically still within the relationship, but that emotional, sexual, relational energy may be being spent on porn. Right, and I know you and I were talking just briefly earlier about the opportunity cost, for lack of better terminology, but what isn't happening because porn has become such an obsessive issue in the life of one person or another.
That's such a serious thing. What isn't happening when perhaps a majority of men in this country, in the United States, and probably worldwide, are viewing pornography and spending their time at that rather than doing something that would otherwise be productive.
Right.
But even on a more personal level, doing something that would build the relationship with their spouse or loved one.
Right. And often within this field, my colleagues and I, we refer to porn widows or sex addiction orphans, kind of that idea that instead of being fathers, husbands, and I realize it's not exclusively gender specific. I very much realize that. I work with women, so it's kind of natural to say those pronouns that direction. But yeah, there is that sense of abandonment and the loss and the grief that come with someone choosing to leave the relationship or choosing to act like we've been talking about outside the relationship versus someone dying or being sick or being pulled away by other causes other than personal choice. It's an excruciating kind of loss and pain.
It's excruciating. And, in fact, one of the reasons that you're here, I know a woman who has gone through this very pain of the grief from sexual abandonment. And I know that you're here visiting her as well. So I appreciate your coming to do that, and I appreciate you being here to join us. Now, one thing about that I've heard from many sources is for a woman who she's discovered her husband is addicted to pornography or involved in an affair or whatever the reason for this sexual abandonment is, many times the woman is reluctant or perhaps even scared of dealing with that grief. And so I understand that you have a model for dealing with grief. Could you describe what you do?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I'm going to do two separate things if it's okay with you. First, I'll introduce the model, and then I'll tell you what resources I've found that help women through, like you said, that challenge of facing
grief.
Great,
that's
right?
perfect.
Okay, so grief model. So let me try to let me encapsulate this here. So when I first started working with women healing from sexual abandonment and sexual betrayal, I used kind of a very classic, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one who originated the original 5 stages of grief. So, and I don't get these in order, I never do, but we've got depression, anger, shock, denial, and acceptance. Right? Okay, so this was the model that I would use to help women deal with the grief of the loss they were facing. It always felt close, but it never felt quite right until I found this book. Now, I brought it here because I sometimes forget the precise title, The Journey from Abandonment to Healing, Surviving Through and Recovering from the 5 Stages That Accompany the Loss of Love. So this is written by a psychotherapist up on the Upper East Coast. Her name is Susan Anderson. I actually just spent the last week of September training with Susan Anderson because I buy into the model. Right now I need more resources. Like help me. Now that I recognize what's going on, let me have more tools for my clients to be able to help them through this. So Susan Anderson created this new model specifically for the kind of grief that results from abandonment. So in her 5-stage model, and she's great. She's got this visual and verbal cue to help us remember these. So the word is swirl, SWIRL. S, shattering, and I'll walk you through these in a second.
Yep.
S, shattering, W, withdrawal, I, internalizing, R, rage, and L, lifting. And by the way, for everyone who's listening, if you go to btr.org/podcast/abandonment, everything I'm about to tell you about this 5-stage model is on there. So you have to try to remember all this in one sitting because that's a lot. But I'd love to tell you a little bit about why this model relates, why it rings true so much for women healing from sexual abandonment. So the shattering, right? That's the first stage. This is pretty self-explanatory. But once again, if we look at it in terms of if a husband went out, had an affair, filed for divorce, left his wife, okay, that's a kind of abandonment we can understand. But let's take an average Covenant Eyes user, someone who struggles with internet pornography, right? So you've got a woman who maybe senses this sense of abandonment in her relationship, but doesn't truly understand why until one day, right? She finds the browser history, or she finds the hard drive, or she finds the pictures, she finds the videos, whatever. And in that moment, her attachment, her security, her safety, her reliance, her existence within the relationship is severed. And Susan Anderson describes this as, like if you think of when a baby is born and literally severed from its parents, the extreme discomfort of that situation is very intensive. And so this is kind of this shattering stage that women go through healing from sexual betrayal. So it's the most relatable one, actually, the one's easiest to wrap our minds around. Withdrawal is where this really gets interesting. So I'll tell you this. So oftentimes I work with women who are going through extreme pain and trauma because they've been sexually abandoned by their porn addict partner. However, they also miss him. So you've got this dynamic where he's hurt her, he's harmed her, she is hemorrhaging from all of that, and yet she's still craving him. She's wanting him to fill that space, and she's grieving because he isn't. And so when women are feeling this conflict, right, this confusion, and I'm thinking that there are people listening to this who are going to get this because they're living it right now, right? When women are confused at this point, there are two words that I often hear them express to me. One of the words is pitiful, and another one of the words is pathetic. How can I be hurting so much and yet still be wanting him to come and make me feel better? Right? So when women are able to, when I'm able to reframe this with women and say, okay, this isn't, you're not pitiful, you're not pathetic, you're not screwed up, you don't need fixed, this isn't a pathology in you, this is grief. This is you grieving that attachment and feeling the pain of that loss and abandonment. What happens? Self-compassion happens. I mean, even just as I'm talking about it, I can feel my shoulders relax because suddenly if I can say, okay, this isn't me being problematic here with this crazy, confusing dynamic that's going on. This is me grieving and figuring my way through it. Suddenly the self-acceptance level grows, exponentially. So that's W. So we've got shattering withdrawal, internalization. This is another one that I swear every woman I meet who's in a relationship with a porn addict partner feels this to some degree or another. This is when, rather than projecting all of the responsibility for the abandonment onto the abandoner, for lack of better terminology, we turn it inward.
I've seen that many times.
I know you have. It's prolific, right?
Yeah.
When we see women dealing with sexual betrayal, this is part of what we see. And again, women hate themselves for that. Most often, so abandonment hurts. But this is when women start abandoning their own self-confidence, their own self-esteem, their own sense of competence and confidence and connection within the relationship. So they turn it inward and grief gets internalized.
I've also seen the husbands or the loved ones use that against the woman and even say, no, it's your fault.
Yes.
And that must really add to that.
Yes.
And
Susan Anderson actually describes this internalization phase as one of the most vulnerable. She said it's when we're vulnerable to infection.
Yes.
Right? When this grief can actually fester and grow and turn dark and insidious. Right? It's a really painful one for women. And again, when I can tell them, this isn't you being insecure. This isn't you struggling with your looks or your body image. This is grief.
It's grief.
Once again, the self-compassion and the patience and the tenderness and the understanding. There's really both an emotional and logical understanding that comes with this for women. It's very comforting. So rage, okay, this is a sticky one, right? Women actually, believe it or not, don't like feeling angry as much as that may surprise some people. But Susan Anderson describes this rage, the kind of rage that responds to abandonment, as this is not punching a pillow rage. That's her way of saying it's not like purposeless or it's just not just a discharge of energy. She said rage in response to abandonment is about injustice. It's about saying something wrong has happened, something has been broken or damaged, and I am vulnerable in a way that I shouldn't have to be vulnerable. And so what she encourages women suffering from, or men or women suffering from abandonment to consider doing is taking that purposeful rage, the rage that says something is wrong, I need to fix this isn't okay, I can't be this vulnerable, and leveraging that into personal and powerful change. Whether that's internal, whether that's within the relationship, whether that's within the broader world. But this is where, when we talk about trauma resolution, and we have this concept of post-traumatic growth, where someone can emerge beyond the trauma experience to make a difference in the lives of people they love and their own life as well. But this rage that serves a purpose, can kind of fill some of that gap. And so then the last one is lifting. And this is one of my favorite stages because it's the least understandable. And I'm almost done, I promise.
That's okay. I'm
You
eating
tracking
it up.
with me?
This is
Okay.
good, yeah.
So L is for lifting. Now, lifting can mean two things. It can happen in both a healthy and unhealthy way. And again, we're remembering this is a grief response, a response to abandonment. So lifting can mean rising above the emotions. So an example that I was just talking with my friend about earlier, it's Thanksgiving dinner, right? I'm grieving, I'm broken. Maybe I just found something on the computer yesterday, okay? I can do one of two things. I can crawl on my bed, I can put the covers over, I can start bawling, I can let everything in my world fall apart. Or I can take a deep breath. I can say, I have these emotions, I will deal with you later. For today, I'm making Thanksgiving dinner for my family. So there's a way that women can use this grief response to cope in a healthy way by not having to deal with all of the grief at once, okay? But sometimes there's an unhealthy response to this where instead of saying, here's my grief, I will deal with you later, it gets stuffed. I stuff it and I rise above, and I stuff it and I rise above. And I see this a lot. I don't know if you do.
I do.
Women
yes.
who are so strong, and Susan Anderson describes it as a callus, an emotional callus, because we've done so much rising above that we're not any longer connected to the emotional grief that is legitimate and appropriate to our circumstances. So there you have it. SWIRL, swirl, shattering, withdrawal, internalization, rage, and lifting. That's the grief model that when I use it with my clients to heal from the pain of sexual abandonment, it's kind of revolutionary because it's a totally different way of looking at it, and it's one that really feels like it fits their circumstances.
So if I'm listening to you right now, if I'm one of the viewers and I'm thinking, well, that all sounds good, but that is, I'm not there. How do I get from here to there? I can't just make a sudden leap across this chasm that I'm looking at. So how do I get from here to there?
Well, one thing that's interesting is I find that once I introduce this concept to women, there is an element of something organic that happens. One of my colleagues says that one of the strongest words in our vocabulary is notice. It's a gentle but strong word. So once women start to notice this dynamic in this grief, it kind of unlocks something. It creates a very natural and organic pathway for this grief process to start happening on its own. However, that's usually not enough. And usually women, or I say women again because that's who I'm working with, need to make some degree of an intentional choice to engage the grief. And it's scary. It's very, very scary. I hear it all the time. We feel that if we lean into the pain, we might get stuck there. We might never come back. We might open a Pandora's box and we don't know what's in there, and we don't know if we can tolerate it. Having been through that shattering, right? It's very scary. So, and I say this having been through it with people who've supported me, and I say it as someone who supports others. Don't do it alone. Don't even try to do it alone. If you can get a trusted friend, a clergy person, a trained trauma-sensitive coach or therapist, someone to help you through it, that can happen one-on-one. It can happen in a supportive group environment, but most cases really don't try to do it alone because it is scary. And so two things. Number one, it's scary. It's also amazing. It's one of the things I tell women. Yeah, you need support because it's going to hurt and it's going to be hard, but you also need people around you to celebrate those little victories when they happen. That deserves witnesses too. Just as much as your pain does, so does your victory over the pain and through the pain. So, like through BTR, we offer one-on-one coaching. I do one-on-one coaching with clients all the time. We do a variety of different support groups, and all of that information, by the way, is available at btr.org/support. I'll give you all the information about our groups. I also do interactive webinars. So for example, on November 18th, I'm going to be doing one specifically on this topic. So Healing and Growing Through Grief is the title of it. And in those webinars, what we do is we give participants a chance to ask questions. So even though it might be a lot it's a one-time environment, but it's enough to really open the doors and say, here's an opportunity that you can do this safely, and if you need follow-up support, you know where to find us.
We're here with Coach Ray from Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org, and you are one of those trained professionals. You are a coach, and I know that if one of our viewers is having this grief, from the betrayal, the sexual abandonment, very often the person who is there simply doesn't know what steps to take. And we were talking earlier about the need. Don't try to get from here to there over in a moment.
Right.
It really requires a series of baby steps. And if you're wondering what those baby steps are, it helps to have the experience of someone who is trained in this to walk you through those baby steps. Say, listen, just make dinner tonight.
Yes. Yes.
That's a baby step.
Yes.
You're in such grief. You are spending your day in bed,
Yes.
and or whatever. Just get up and make dinner tonight.
Yeah.
And that's a win. That's a victory.
It is.
And so to have somebody like Coach Ray who can walk you through those baby steps. So do you have any more to say about the baby steps? It's such an essential thing.
I do. Well, and I appreciate your shedding some highlight on the topic because, the point between here and there can be so intimidating and so overwhelming that sometimes we don't even try. Right. And I remember being on the phone with a client one time. This was a very, very long time ago. And she had just gotten a major, major discovery about infidelities and addictions within her marriage. And I asked her if she'd eaten. She hadn't eaten anything in 3 days. I go, okay, do you have something in your house you can eat? And she said, yeah, I think I have an apple. So I stayed on the phone with her while she walked to the fridge, got the apple out, and ate the apple. Right. That's what she needed at that particular time. Sometimes women need permission to stay in their marriage. Sometimes they feel when they discover things that the first thing they should do that's expected of them is to say, I won't tolerate that, I'm leaving, right? So sometimes she needs support enough to say, you get to stay until or unless you need to leave. Sometimes she needs that. Sometimes she needs reinforcement to say, you can fight for your family, and you can fight for your marriage, and you can fight for your faith. And sometimes she needs permission to say it's okay to let go, right? And all those things start with baby steps. Here's what I tell my clients. I tell my clients that doing those day-to-day baby steps, it's like taking your multivitamins, right? It's something you do for maintenance. It's something you do to build up your strength so that when those crisis moments hit, when you're at those major crossroads, when you're called upon to make an intensive decision, you've got what it takes. And in those moments, you get the payoff from all the hard work you've done up until then. So the baby steps are different for everybody. And that's one of the things I love about being a coach is I get to work with so many different women in so many different scenarios, and I get to meet each one where she's at. I don't need a template. I don't need a curriculum or a format. It's like you and me, we show up, we figure out what's going on with you, and we support you in meeting your needs in whichever direction you need to go.
Yeah. Well, Coach Ray, thank you for joining us. I hope this has been helpful, at least to some of our viewers who just need to know that there is hope. There really is hope. And rather than looking at these giant tasks before me, wondering how am I going to make it to the end, just to know that these baby steps and to actually have someone like a coach walk you through those baby steps. And I know that you have many other resources. I know the btr.org/books is one resource. You have this webinar on November 18th. We'll put in the comments a link to that webinar so that you can watch that webinar.
We have a free weekly podcast that comes out every Tuesday morning. Usually one of our executive director, Ann, will interview someone on our team or someone else with training in this field. So it's one of the free resources we offer, which we love to do. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff on our website.
One of the most important things for if you are going through this is to recognize that you're not the only one to begin with,
important.
And you don't have to go through it alone.
Yes.
And if you know that, at least there is hope. And so just welcome our viewers to visit Coach Ray's website. And I just want to thank you for joining us here. This is an important message, and it's one that is not out there enough. And so I want to thank you for joining us from California. Thank you all for joining us on Facebook and YouTube Live. Appreciate it.